Hi friends, welcome back to another They're in the walls. Generation Tech. Today we're going to continue our series that looks at the roles of various Star Wars vehicles. So far we've covered Rebel and Imperial starfighters and capital ships. Now we're going to go back about 20 or so years to the Clone Wars and look at the Separatist Alliance, starting off with their starships. Although the Confederacy of Independent Systems does have a centralized navy, mainly made up of droid ships and fighters produced by the Trade Federation or Techno-Union affiliated shipyards. Due to the remote location of most Confederate planets, it was quite common for member states to have planetary defense forces that usually supplemented Separatist forces in case of a Republic invasion. These planetary defense forces were generally made up of locally manufactured fighters that were quite unique to the species that lived on that planet. Geonosians were an isolated and xenophobic alien race known for their lack of morality and value for sentient life. They also happened to be extremely industrious and productive as a species, partly due to the fact that most of their species was controlled by a hive mind. Factoid Armor Workshop, one of the main manufacturers of battle droids in the galaxy at the time, approached the Geonosians to design several secret factories for the Trade Federation. As a result, Geonosis became an extremely important planet for both the Republic and Separatist Alliance during the Clone Wars and was the site of several battles. Along with the massive droid armies that were being manufactured there and the CIS fleet that was stationed there to protect it from invasion, the Geonosians also had their own standing army and starship corps. One of the most popular ships deployed by the Geonosians was the Nantex-class territorial defense starfighter, manufactured by domestic company Hoopla Passatis Shipwrights Collective. These were incredibly nimble fighters which, like the TIE fighter, emphasized movement, speed, and killing prowess over protection. The Geonosians had plenty of worker drones to throw at the enemy, after all. The craft was fitted with a bubble canopy for maximum visibility for the pilots, and in the center of the ship was a strange laser emplacement that could swivel and fire in every direction. This meant that the Nantex class was one of the rare starfighters that could fire off-bore, which made it incredibly deadly no matter which angle it was positioned in. But as versatile as the main laser on the Nantex was, it was quite underpowered compared to most starships, but this was quite usual for planetary defense forces that were mainly designed to police and defend local systems against pirates and other criminals. The Nantex fighters also had 100 tiny tractor beams which could lock onto ships and stabilize them, increasing the accuracy of the laser. They could also grapple onto ships at close range. With an impressive in-atmosphere top speed of 1,250 kilometers per hour or 7 feet per gallon in standard measurements, these ships were oftentimes deployed in large swarms, which I imagine would be terrifying to fly through. With their off-bore lasers constantly in position to fire and their massive numbers, surviving an attack from a Nantex swarm is more based on luck rather than skill. Another product of the Geonosian shipwright was the Genevex-class Fanblade starfighter. Fitted with a Class 1 hyperdrive shield and a more complicated nav system, the Fanblade was designed for deep space combat and longer missions when compared to the Nantex territorial starfighter. Used by Separatist agents, these fan-shaped ships, like most Separatist ships, were incredibly fast and nimble. When in combat, the Fanblade opens up its fans and spreads out the 4 wingtip swivel-mounted lasers that automatically adjust to enemy targets. This did increase the profile of the ship, but like the X-Wing, it spread the lasers out to decrease the amount of heat being generated by these weapons. The Fanblade was also equipped with baffles on the engine, which made it incredibly stealthy as well. Like the Solar Sailor, which was also designed by the same shipwright, the wings on the Fanblade could serve as an alternative form of propulsion. The variable geometry self-propelled battle droid was designed by Hardtar Engineering and was one of the cheapest and most commonly deployed ships by the Separatist Navy. At only 7 meters in length, they were about half the length of a Republic ARC 170 starfighter. They were able to achieve this tiny size because the Vulture Droid had a droid brain, which was a lot smaller than a cockpit, and also they didn't need to fit a life support system on these droid ships. This made the droid fighter incredibly small and therefore very hard to hit. These fighters were also incredibly maneuverable and could handle as many Gs as the structure of the ship could handle. The Vulture Droid also lacked shields and hyperdrive, which meant most of its storage was left for weapons. This included twin blaster cannons along with 2 energy torpedoes and also a Buzz Droid missile launcher. Buzz Droids were incredibly feared by all spacers. These tiny droids launched onto ships, disabled crucial components like life support and power generators, and then cut right through the hull of a ship, causing explosive decompression. Decades after the Clone Wars was over, there were still several no-go areas in the galaxy where Buzz Droid fields were still deployed. The biggest weakness of these Vulture droids was the fact that they ran on battery fuel cells, which severely limited their range. So these ships were mainly deployed for point defense interception and had to be stationed around space stations or carriers. The Vulture droids also used relatively simple droid brains, which were kind of predictable, which meant that they were better suited for swarm attacks. In a one-on-one scenario, a well-trained clone pilot could usually overcome the Vulture droid's simple programming. The Vulture droids could also be deployed as walker tanks when they landed, making them quite useful for defending locations. The Rogue-class Starfighter looks like a larger version of the Vulture droid, but was actually a separate line of starships designed by Factoid Workshops. These starfighters were primarily used by General Grievous's IG-100 Magna Guard droids and other Separatist agents and leaders. They were pretty straightforward ships equipped with 2 heavy laser cannons and a hyperdrive. They were known to be incredibly maneuverable and easy to use in close-range knife fights. Bounty Hunter Cad Bane preferred these starfighters and once even asked for one as payment. He also requested a cloaking device be placed on the ship as well. The Umbarans were even more isolated and xenophobic than the Geonosians. Despite this, their society was gifted enough to develop its own technology without any outside influence. This is why their ships were quite weird and had design features not seen in other ships. The Umbaran Starfighters was a classic example of Umbaran tech. Instead of featuring a physical cockpit, the pilot sat in a chair that was completely ray shielded when activated. Instead of having a physical control stick, the craft was flown using holographic interfaces by using the hand. This made the ship pretty hard to fly for pilots who were used to having more tactile feel on the control stick. The flight characteristics of the Umbaran Starfighter seemed more like that of a helicopter or a VTOL, as it was able to hover quite easily in place and rotate as well. Instead of using blaster cannons and lasers, the main armament, like most Umbaran tech, was plasma-based and far more powerful. The ship also had 2 mounted missile pods which launched electromagnetic pulse missiles. The Hyena-class bomber was very similar to the Vulture droid. Designed by Factoid Armor Workshop, these droid fighters were about twice as long as the Vulture, featured 2 heads, one for piloting and one on the bottom of the droid, which served as a munitions officer. The Hyena class could carry up to 6 proton torpedoes, 6 concussion missiles, and 4 proton bombs, making it quite heavily armed for its size. This again was because there was no organic pilot and any of the systems that you would need to keep someone alive in space. The Hyena was equipped with twin laser cannons and was quite maneuverable, but for the most part served as an attack fighter to support droid armies on the ground. The bombers were also involved in several humanitarian missions on Ryloth, where they dropped ordnances on villages and cities across the planet. Like the Vulture droid, the Hyena could also be deployed in walker mode, making it a dual threat. Last but definitely not least is the Tri-Droid Starfighter. These are far smaller and more compact than any other fighter on this list. At only 5.4 meters, these tiny fighters had a very small profile and were incredibly hard to hit. The ship was made up of 3 arms and a central droid brain mounted on a gyroscope. Despite its small size, the Tri-Fighter was extremely heavily armed. It had 4 blaster cannons, proton torpedoes, concussion missiles, and also the feared Buzz Droid missiles. When introduced by the Separatist Alliance late in the Clone Wars, it initially took the clone pilots by surprise. Not only were these ships superb in design, they also featured an upgraded droid brain, which made them more unpredictable. These droid tri-fighters were especially successful at taking down the ARC-170. At the Battle of Coruscant, the tri-fighters exposed just how impractical the larger ARC-170 was, which eventually led the Galactic Republic and Empire to focus more on nimble single-seater fighters. So there you have it, guys. Those are the main starfighters deployed by the Confederate Navy, along with the member states and planetary defense forces of the member states of the Confederacy. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.